Okay, so we are now live from Dubai. Myself, Mihai, together with Razvan, virtually introducing Boris. Hello, everyone.
Hey, everyone.
From Dubai. Yeah. So very quick introduction. My name is Mihai. I'm from co-hosting from ProductTank Dubai. We've been doing a sort of, for the past couple of years, we've been doing online events. Last month, we had our first offline event in Dubai, and now we're back with an online event. So I think we're going to do a one-on-one. We will share a little bit more about ProductTank a bit later. But then maybe Razvan wants to have a few words, and then we will let Boris introduce himself. Razvan, you want to add a few words?
Sorry, I missed that last bit. I think I was having some technical issues. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was saying if you want to introduce yourself very quickly.
Yeah, hi. My name is Razvan. I'm a product manager. I'm currently working on a startup myself, and also previously I worked with the government on the Time Abu Dhabi project for the e-governance. And I've been a full-time ProductTank organizer since 2017, along with Mihai.
Yes. So then we have Boris all over from Berlin joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Sure.
So very quick introduction from my end. First of all, Razvan and Mikhail, thanks so much for inviting me and having me here. And this is my first online ProductTank, or actually online talk. It's kind of weird and funky not to be able to see, who's on the other side, and just like talking into an empty space. So it's kind of a weird feeling. Anyhow, very short about myself. I've been a PM for a bit more than a decade. I've started my career by co-founding startups in Belgrade, Serbia, 2 startups to be more precise. Then I kind of worked for a few other startups and smaller companies, usually in the capacity of a head of product or the first PM who takes the ball from the CEO and runs with it. And then I've kind of moved to the Fortune 500 end of the spectrum, and I work currently with Wayfair. I'm with Wayfair for more than 2 years now.
Amazing. It's good to have you, Boris.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Quick question. I've seen in somewhere in your post or in your company that you're hiring. So $1 million question. Are you hiring remote as well, or people have to be based in Berlin or Germany, or how does it work?
That's actually is $1 million question. So I think theoretically, we're hiring for all the locations in which Wayfair is, which basically in Europe means Berlin, Germany. In this moment, I know that we're open for remote work from anywhere from within Germany. Not so much from other countries. Like, for example, if somebody would want to work from Dubai, I'm not sure it would actually be possible to work for Wayfair like that. But from within Germany, any sort of remote setting is more than possible.
Okay. There's your token question, Mihai. Yeah, I'm absolutely thrilled about this topic, because when I first read about this and Mihai introduced this topic, it's really amazing, because this has been something I've read about and I love to read about. And because of my experience with startups, and then what my previous experience with a government entity and my current experience as a startup, I know the dichotomy, and I know the effort it takes to switch tracks and to know that, okay, what my remit is in one of those verticals and then what my remit is in others. And people usually find it very difficult. I know it took me a while to actually get a hang of, okay, it's the same thing, but how massively different it is. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
Totally.
Okay, so we usually ask people, attendees, where are you from? But since this is mostly promoted through a ProductTank Dubai, I expect most of the people to be from the UAE at least. But
it would be great to know. So that's again one of the limitations of the virtual setting, where we can't actually have interaction with people on the other side. But I would also like to know, like, how many of the people are actually in the product, and for how long, and how many people are kind of like just being interested in product, because that would also help me tailor my my talk better to if I know like who's on the other side, and it will be easier for me to kind of like frame the messages better. If that's anyhow possible through Facebook, through YouTube comments, like we can do that, but I don't know if it is.
Yeah, that's totally doable. So there's an interesting twist to this. So yeah, let's go ahead and post the answers in which, if you're in product or not, and let's see what we can get.
Just like yes or no for I am or I'm not in product, and if yes, then for how long? That would be great to know.
Yeah. So we have 2 people already. There's Anton, who's the senior product manager from Kareem, and we have Kristen, who's a product lead from Sierra Group.
Great.
And there's Mihai himself with some product experience, I think. Just a tad.
Yeah. So okay, so guys, you can post your comments on YouTube, and then we will translate those comments into our conversation. We have Atina, who is also a product manager. We have Nishant Parki, who is a director in product management with MasterCard. Yeah.
Good to have you, Nishant. We have Jigdesh with 6 months of product experience somewhere, or maybe total 6 months product experience. We have 6 years of product experience.
Awesome.
Amazing.
8+ as a software engineer. Awesome.
Yeah.
So great. Okay, so we got people across the board.
Yeah.
That's so great. Awesome.
Okay, another question which we usually ask, and then maybe if we can discuss about this in 2-3 minutes, and then we'll jump into the actual session. Sure. We really like to ask our guest speakers about about a book. It can be product or non-product, but which has influenced your product career. And if you can just share a few words about that.
Okay, interesting. So I'm not actually sure if there's a book that kind of influenced my career, or like one book that influenced my career to a great extent. I can share one book which I'm reading right now, actually, getting to the end of it. I think it's great. Not literally like 100% product related, but I find it hugely useful for product. It's the book called Never Split the Difference. Let me see. I can show like this. It's a book about negotiation called Never Split the Difference, written by Chris Voss, who's a former FBI hostage negotiator, who led teams in FBI for international hostage negotiation. And the book's great because it talks about underlying emotional responses to everything we say, and how to use that to understand the other side better, how to actually employ active empathy in acknowledging the other side, understanding the other side, and then engaging in a productive negotiation discussion with the other side. And I'm sure that everybody would agree that being a product person, you're negotiating a lot.
All the time.
All the time.
All the time.
So I think that book, like my very, very warm recommendation to kind of be better at listening to other people and knowing that, and have them know kind of that you're really trying to engage in a productive conversation for the benefit of both parties. So yeah, that's it.
That's an interesting point of view. I mean, I love reading books that are directly connected to product, but every now and then you need a break and you need a different perspective, which at the end still adds a little bit of benefit to what we do on a daily basis. I've heard the recommendations from this book from several places, and it just increases the weight of me having to read that.
Right.
Definitely one for Kindle, huh?
Yeah. Cool. Okay, amazing. So I guess we can jump into the actual talk. What we're gonna do is gonna give you the stage. We're gonna remove ourselves. So guys, everyone who's listening, feel free to add your questions on the chat. And then at the end of the talk, we're gonna have a Q&A session. and ideally we should connect with each other and continue the growing the community together. But more on that after the talk with Boris.
Cool.
Enjoy the talk, everyone.
We'll see you at the end.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, guys. Thanks a lot. Cool. So let's just jump right into it. So essentially, by the way, before I do, Mikhail mentioned that we'll do Q&A session at the end of the presentation, of course, but at the same time, feel free to shoot questions while the presentation is active. I really like to be interactive. And if there's something that you guys feel you'd like me to kind of like double click or scratch a little bit deeper into, I'd be more than happy to do that than just like kind of run the presentation the way it's structured. So feel free to shoot questions. I'll be happy to kind of address them as we go, not wait the very end of the presentation. So anyhow, without further ado, what I'd like to talk about today is how to work as a PM in different operational contexts. The two kind of like at the end of the spectrum are a startup in a large kind of like multinational enterprise. But the point is about being able to work in a variety of different operational contexts and how to excel in both. So before I get into that topic, just a little bit about me and my background. We mentioned that at the beginning of the presentation, but I guess many of you didn't join back then. So I started my career as a startup founder. Actually, first I've been kind of a freelancer for quite a bit of time, but then I co-founded 2 products with a few great folks together in Belgrade, Serbia, and worked with those startups for good number of years, after which I kind of shifted gears and went more onto helping other startups build their product and work with them, again, like in a variety of different life cycle stages, from incepting a brand new product to the market to pivoting a business strategy of a mature product and so on, across a variety of different business models like B2C, B2C, and so on. And then after a number of years of doing that, I shifted gears again and moved to the Fortune 500 end of the spectrum. And I worked with Wayfair for a little bit more than 2 years. And kind of like the key moments for me switching careers were trying to learn, and I think Rizwan mentioned that also earlier today, trying to learn something in a setting I couldn't do before. When I moved kind of from my startup to working for others was mostly because I kind of got to a point where I understood that I really excel at hustling and getting things done, but I really weren't so good at kind of building people in managing the company. And I was like, hey, I really, instead of building third startup, I really need to learn how to do that. I kind of switch gears and move over. And then also a couple of years later, I was like, okay, I'm really good at these kind of things, but I'm not so good and kind of understanding how to build relationship with peers and people. And then you move like into a huge company where you've got to build relationships. So it's kind of like gap closing was my motive into kind of shifting gears and moving around. With that, so the first thing I want to talk when we talk about the PMs in various operational contexts in startup, in a large company, is that we all know, we've seen, and there's a lot of talk, whenever you got like a question like on Reddit and Quora, you're like, hey, why is PMing being so different in this company or that company? And that's true. A PM role, a PM function, contrary to like engineers or marketing or other customer success, it really differs to a huge extent between companies, because primarily what product tries to do for the company is tries to help company get out through the door something the company needs. And depending on how the company is structured, that can look completely different. A company might need somebody who's going to manage the engineering team and be a facilitator of them getting things out the door, or it might need somebody who's going to be responsible for like building features and having feature factory ownership, or if it's a different culture, it can be somebody who's actually responsible for product strategy. But the role of product differs hugely. However, there are 3 dimensions, which I want to mention right here, which are the same kind of a common denominators to no matter what kind of setting you were in, this is a common denominator. And that's being able to understand the customer, understand how things work, and understand the market. Those are 3 common denominators for every PM, regardless of where they work at. And if a PM is not fulfilling one of these functions, they're not actually a PM. They're more maybe like a business requirement analyst or a project manager or something else. But in order to be a PM, you need to work with people who build the product and understand how things work, meaning basically engineers, not necessarily, but basically designers, UX, and everybody else involved. You also got to be close with people who use the product and understand deeply your customers and their needs. But at the same time, you got to be close with the people like sales, marketing, CEO, whoever you report to, whoever owns and finances the product. And you need to understand the market. You need to understand what product wants to accomplish in the market. And the reason why is this incredibly important is because product as a function essentially mitigates 4 key risks. Value and usability risks, those are 2. Which basically mean the product needs to de-risk and understand whether customers will buy or choose to use the product. Also, whether customers understand how to use the product, the usability risk. That's also something that PMs owns in a sense of de-risking that as things iterate and move forward. PM also needs to understand whether the solution works for various aspects of the business they're into, which is business viability risk. Can products work with other products in a suite? Can product actually leverage the existing marketing channels to get out in the market? Those are all the things the product person needs to understand. And finally, the feasibility risk. Can we actually ship and get a product out the door with the people, with the technology we have, with the team we have, with the size, with the time we have, which is hugely important. And product cannot outsource that understanding, cannot be a proxy to somebody else who's going to say, yeah, we can do that. A product person needs to understand. I think one of the most frequent questions I've seen in various product communities is how technical a PM has to be. Does a PM need to code? Do they need to understand the code? Do they need to do this or that? And essentially, my kind of answer to that is a PM needs to be as technical as required to understand the feasibility risk, to understand whether the team and the technology of the product is sufficient to get what business wants out there in the market. So those things are a common denominators to being a product and operating as a PM in no matter which setting. Now let me shift a little bit into what it means being a PM in kind of 2 edge case settings, and that's a startup PM and enterprise PM. Startup PM essentially is about tackling big risks really early. Typically, like if we look at that Eric Rice's definition, startups trying to kind of like understand and get a repeatable success in the market. Being a startup is about understanding your product market fit, or if you're close to a product market fit, kind of understanding how to grow and how to scale. And doing that means not being clear on what are things that need to be done, operating in a lot of like unknown amount of unknowns environment, and essentially being able to tackle huge risks, big risks very quickly, very early. Treats for a person that does that are that they need to be able to work with very little detail, with very little resources, meaning being quite scrappy, able to move fast, like the Facebook rule, like move fast, break things. It exists for a reason. And moving fast is related to intuition. You can't get into analysis paralysis mode of trying to get all the right data in order to make a data-informed decision. Very often you don't have a time for that, because one thing that startup lacks is resources, and the most important resource is time and money, right? So you don't have the time, you don't have the money to be that much sure with all the amount of data. You really need to get that risks out there and de-risk them real quick. So the emphasis for a PM in such environment, in such habitat, basically, is on the product development skills, meaning on the skills where you're able to make good economic choices, to optimize processes in order to know if assumptions right as fast as possible, as cheap as possible, and essentially having a continual sense of urgency to get out something to the customers real quick and real fast. So you need to have a good frame for speed to value and rapid iterations. That's the essence of a startup PM. we're going to get a bit later into kind of like what good frameworks are to manage that level of uncertainty, very high level of some uncertainty. But in essence, the core of a startup PM is to be comfortable with ambiguity and to manage high levels of uncertainty. Now, switching to completely different side, basically, into enterprise environment, it's much more around being a business unit leader of established, because like enterprise environment means you're operating within established business. So the rules are known. There are like not that many unknowns as in a startup, and you're essentially running the business. A super important thing when we talk about management and kind of like saying, hey, startup is like 80% product, 20% management, and enterprise PMs, 8% management, 20% product. The word management doesn't mean that or doesn't imply that you're actually managing anything or anyone in a direct sense. It refers more to that leadership without authority thing and ability to move the needle on your goals without directly having people under your management. Why is that so important? Essentially, as a PM in a large company, you're rarely managing a whole product. Of course, like if you're on a director level, VP level, of course, you manage maybe not even one, you're managing a whole suite of products. But at PM, typically controls a part of a product. And then they need to rely on various upstream and downstream partners in order to together deliver value to the customer. For example, if you're like, let's say you're a Facebook PM, you could hypothetically be a PM for a friend's request. I'm not sure. The disclaimer: I'm not related to Facebook, so I just assume that there is a PM for friends requests, right? And what the PM technically owns is a friend request service, which basically feeds various clients like mobile app, desktop, newsfeed, and so on. And they are, in order for them to succeed, they are heavily reliant on various upstream engineering teams that feed them with data, as well as downstream teams that need to consume their data. And only like that, they together, so they basically don't deliver the value to the customer. They unlock value for other teams who deliver to the customer, which is why communication and alignment is a pivotal trait for a PM. They need to excel at communicating clearly, crisply, and compellingly. In a startup, like everybody knows you, like there's like maybe 20 of you, there's like 100 or 200 of you, but everybody's rallied around your main one product, and everybody kind of knows the goals, everybody knows what you're trying to do, everybody knows what the product does. In a company of like 20,000 people, 90% of your co-workers have zero clues what you work on and what is your product and how the product fits into other products that the company has. There's huge amount of balls moving at the same time in different speeds. And the only way you can actually interface all the organizational edges that you need to interface is if you're able to be clear, crisp, and compelling in your communication. You need to manage everybody's expectation. You need to be able to trade with like objectives and key results that everybody else is having, which also you are having. You need to manage ambiguity. You need to generate a shared reality amongst all the peers and upstream. Everybody needs to be clear. Like it's very easy in a large company for miscommunication to happen because again, like people don't understand what to do, and if you're ambiguous, they will assume something else, and that can create like a domino effect of problems. So essentially, PM invests a lot of time. That's why I say 8% management. They invest a lot of time in providing the context, in managing everybody's expectation, in generating shared reality. And a very typical thing for large companies is that a PM often relies on SMEs, which stands for subject matter experts, for domain knowledge, because very often a PM is going to inherit an area or a product they know little about, and they need to ramp up their knowledge real quick about the product. But still, there are people who will know a lot about the specific product and specific domain, and the PM needs to rely on them to a great extent to understand the nuances and various kind of like weeds of details of managing the product. A super important thing also about talking about kind of like a large company is in impact and influence, and why I'm saying 8% management. is essentially how to communicate your goals and your impact to the company. There's like a good, so this would be super interesting if I could see hands in the air in the audience, but this is impossible right now. So I'm pretty sure that, for example, a lot of you have used Calendly at least once. I'm going to make an educated guess that like 90% of the audience here has used Calendly. I use Calendly a lot. We don't want to put something on somebody else's meeting who's not in my organization. And the whole point of Calendly, that Calendly as a product, as a company exists, is simply because Google Calendar and Gmail do not talk to each other. Because if they did, Calendly wouldn't need to exist. Of course, I'm a little bit oversimplifying things, but I think the point is kind of the same. A characteristic of large companies is that individual teams may often have goals and objectives that are not aligned with yours. And if you want to create a lever for yourself, you need to understand those goals. I would be safe to assume that for Gmail team or Google Calendar team, it could be like maybe a month of investment to build the Calendly, to replicate the Calendly functionality natively in Google ecosystem, but they're just not incentivized to do that because they're pursuing other goals. How does that relate to a typical corporate PM? If you have goals and you rely and you're blocked by the various upstream teams in delivering those goals because they have different set of OKRs than you, you're never going to succeed. So in order to be able to influence those teams to jointly deliver value, you need to be a great communicator and need to be able to create great alignments. And that's basically what enterprise PM is all about. So kind of to get those two edge cases of like operational context together and compare. If I want to use one sentence to describe startup versus enterprise, it's trading speed for power. It basically means that you're not going to have as much of autonomy, but you're going to have huge amounts of resources. You're going to have like think of abundance of resources versus scarcity of resources, and having like having them at your disposal, which makes kind of the look at the world very differently. One thing that I've really got accustomed with large companies, and I wouldn't like to lose, in a startup environment, is having that amount of resources. You need to know something about a customer, like, hey, I need this market research. If one doesn't exist, you can get one. If you want to talk to customers, you can get like your customer reach out wherever in the teams that can get to any type of customer personas you're interested in. You can build a query. You can build like a small query for them, and you're like, hey, I want to get answer to these 7 questions, and you're going to get those seven questions in a week back to you. So you also you need some data. You can get access to huge amounts of like BI teams, data analytics teams. So you can get anything you need to do your job properly. And getting back, like trying to tie this to my slide about startups where you're scrappy, you need to do all those things by yourself. So the very first thing, like you're expected in a startup to make decisions. In a large company, you're expected to drive consensus and create alignments. In a startup, you get a lot of freedom to customize the role. In a large company, you can specialize, you can go really deep. You have a lot of opportunities for advancement within a single vertical. In a startup, you just need to get things out the door. You don't have a lot of runway, you don't have a lot of time, you don't have a lot of money. The reason number one for startups going down is not because there is no market for them, is because they actually run out of fuel, run out of people, run out of money. Let me just take this question. What about startups or completely new business verticals within enterprises? This is an awesome question. And actually, I am addressing that question. I'm addressing that question, I think, slide from now. So I'm going to put a pin on this and get back to this in around 4 or 5 minutes. But this is an awesome question. They do exist. They definitely do exist. So in a startup, you need to keep shipping and iterating. In a large company, you need to maintain the visibility. Again, why so? Because the value that teams collectively deliver very often relies on other adjacent teams, on other organizational edges. And you can't just put things in their roadmap 2 weeks from now. So you're going to make sure that the constellation is right. When you look, for example, when you compare roadmaps into worlds, like a 6-month roadmap or a 12-month roadmap in a startup is like a 2-liner. Like, we want to build X. That's a huge epic on a 12-month roadmap. Like, we want to build X. In large company, that doesn't fly. In a large company, you're spending equal amount of time making sure that your next sprint's right, as much as you do making sure that you put the things in the right constellation 9 months from now. You want to build something 9 months from now, you got to scope that. You got to have engineering estimating. You got to talk to your marketing manager counterparts, engineering manager, UX engineering manager counterparts, and you got to think, like, does it make sense? How you want to go about it? You got to talk to your bosses about it. Does that align with your world strategy in 12 months from now? You got to understand how it impacts the business viability. You want to build this? Do we have channels and resources to push that out of the market? So you're spending a lot of time thinking about things that might or might not get executed 9 months from now. But it's the only way you can go. In startup, you just don't have a runway for things like that. So that's kind of like putting head-to-head those two distinct operational contexts next to each other. Now, the thing is that up until now, I've been talking about like this black and white parts of the picture, startup and enterprise, but there's a lot of operational context in between. In various operational contexts, even within a enterprise, which have certain level of distinctions and need to be talked about, and how a PM can thrive in them. And one of them is the question that asked right now. So typically, a large company has their current core business, right? Every company started as a startup at one moment, and then they kind of like nailed the market fit, and then started to grow, and they become a large company and scaled. So they have that core business that they're defending, but having a surplus of money in of course, an appetite to grow, they're also investing. And I think like a 3 horizon framework is a great to describe this picture, but others can use as well. So they also want to invest in opportunities that lie in adjacent market spaces. Maybe some of them which are kind of being where customers are cared from competitors, or some which are untapped a little bit. And they usually like look at that like from a 1 to 2 year long runway in one to tackle those opportunities. And there's a high level of certainty that these ventures will succeed. Like, for example, if you look at Amazon as a business, their second horizon could be a drone delivery. It's probably kind of like a year or 2 away. There are some uncertainties and some ambiguities around how that could work, but there's a high level of likelihood that that venture makes a lot of sense, and that is going to create a tremendous amount of value for Amazon. But also, some companies have a third horizon, which basically are things that lie on a horizon like 5 years from now, where there's a huge amount of uncertainty that could be actually a viable business, and where companies making a very bold bets, typically very bold bets for a reason of disrupting themselves. Companies today understand it's better to disrupt yourself than somebody else disrupt you. So they're investing in that. Like an example for that could be essentially like, think about Facebook and think about Oculus VR. There's a line you can draw from what Facebook does today to what Oculus VR unlocks, but that line's very blurry. It's definitely a couple of years ahead, not 2 by far, and there's not a huge level of certainty that that as a business could be successful. So there are different kind of like needs a company wants to cater to, and people who work in those settings need to be fundamentally different. The PMs that manage and that run Horizon 1 businesses, essentially, in all the management in traditional sense of businesses, is very risk averse, and basically they are they use kind of like risk averse approaches to making decisions whether they want to invest in something or not, and trying to create incremental value and increase revenue in company 1 by 2 or 3% a year. And like a PM that operates in such environments needs to be like a discipline, needs to be overachiever, needs to exceed plans. That's kind of the set of traits that's required for a company to succeed, for a PM to succeed in kind of like a Horizon 1 company. Let me just get a question real quick. This requires sufficient contractors, quality of work. Okay, let's leave this question to the end. It's not very related with this, so I don't want to create a lot of divergence. So I'm going to take this question at the end. The Horizon 2 businesses require a different set of PMs, and this is incredibly important, because if you take like a traditional risk-averse PM and put him in a high uncertainty setting, such as a Horizon 2, they would get, who basically does not trust their gut instinct in making decisions, they would essentially get into decision paralysis, into analysis paralysis, and they will not succeed. They would not be set for success. So you need a different kind of PMs, a different kind of person that has their kind of PM toolbox and their traits built and honed in a different way, required to succeed in such environments. At the same time, you don't want that kind of PM operating your core business, because you wouldn't want somebody who likes moving fast and breaking things, getting into your product that generates millions or billions of dollars a year and changing everything, right? At the end, you have, and we get to this question around startup in an enterprise, you get to a third horizon, which essentially is a startup in a corp. And the processes of that team, in the level of uncertainty that they're handling, is so high that they're basically starting from a clean slate. There is no way that these teams and these PMs can make data-informed decisions. There's no way they can do that. They actually operate against a blank slate, and you need the kind of persons that are capable of doing that. So these are different contexts, but what is a common denominator for all of them is knowing that a PM fundamentally is expected to make high quality decisions in every operative context. That's what we do. A PM basically deals with a point of a PM, a job of us as PM is to be able to repeatedly tackle novel problems and consistently make high quality decisions and set expectations how we move forward inside that context. So the key word in this is basically the uncertainty. And there's a great way of dealing with uncertainty. There are frameworks that help how to deal with uncertainty, which I'm going to spend a minute talking about, because they lay a blueprint of how you basically make mental models for dealing with uncertainty, how you assess and sense your surrounding in your environment, and how you're able to act and to create progress in such environment. The first one is basically the simple, or often called obvious, environment or level of uncertainty, where you're dealing with known knowns, right? So you're basically having, like, example of that is like you have got a stable feature set, you've got a saturated option of your product, you're dealing with a roadmap that effectively you know what you want to build, and you can, like, in such setting, you can use any of like PM frameworks that help you prioritize your backlog. Like you can rely, for example, on the RISE framework, where you can like count on the risk factor based on the impact and impact score. And what else does RISE stand for? Risk, impact, I forgot a little bit. So basically, you're kind of calculating the score between the impact and the effort needed to deliver something, and then you can prioritize. And that's the way of operating within known knowns, right? The next level would basically be a complicated level of uncertainty, complicated environment, where you have known amount of unknown. So there's a problem you need to solve. There's something you don't know, but you know how to get that information. So the information is obtainable even if you don't have it. You can predict cause and effect. And effectively, like that could mean a large company, like you're building a roadmap and you might have some dependencies with other teams, and you don't know how they will affect your roadmap, but you know where to go, you know who to talk to in order to de-risk and in order to kind of like get the information that you need. Or you can do some lower level discovery work and some hypothesis validation, and you can very quickly grab that information and that's needed and validate or prove or disapprove hypothesis. But essentially, you're working within an environment where even if you don't know things, you know how to get them. But from that to kind of like a end of the spectrum where you know how to get information, the next one is a complex space where there's unknown amounts of unknown. So this is the spot where you can only deduct things in hindsight, where there's no known answers to questions. That's basically where you start your very first large hypothesis you need to de-risk. If you're in a startup environment, those are your key hypotheses around your users and the value that your product or your features are bringing to those users. And you need to be able to understand, you don't know what the right answer. All you can know is how can you get to a point where you have sufficient amount of information to make the best possible answer you can, best possible decision you can make, and then move forward and kind of de-risk and de-risk more. And that, the last one, the fourth level is basically the chaotic. That's kind of the blank slate. That's a space where you effectively know nothing. There's no way, there's no information. You don't know how to get any information. In a product context, this is the very early stage startup. This is when a startup actually starts. They know literally nothing. Cause and effect completely unclear. You don't even know if there exists a problem. You know, your first step would probably be to understand if the problem actually exists in the first place to start with, right? And all new products, all new companies kind of start from that. In these levels, the 4 levels are basically circular. So typically a process starts from a chaos and then kind of de-risks, and you get to know a bit more, and it gets into a complex state where you're kind of like validating some key hypotheses, but you're pretty sure that the problem exists, right? But then when you de-risk that, you move into a complicated state where you kind of like don't have a situation where you don't know what can happen. You can already employ some cause and effect deduction, and you're getting kind of to understand the last pieces of things you don't understand. You can kind of build a long-term roadmap with some level of uncertainty, and you're moving into kind of a full solution space where you just need to deliver things. The thing is that there can be other examples of such chaotic space, and like the whole situation that we're in today, like the whole pandemic, that's one example of a complete chaos that the world found themselves in, right? Yes, thank you for the reach, impact, confidence efforts. Thanks a lot. That definitely, that's it. Should a visionary PM have some natural entrepreneurial skills, or should he be an MBA alumni? So definitely not an MBA alumni. I can tell you that. Like those kind of things are not taught in the MBA. MBA helps you be more risk averse, if anything, and gives you typically a good toolbox of proper frameworks to kind of like minimize the risks in any business, to understand kind of the outside impacts, the inside impacts, organizational dynamics, and things like that. But it's not something that helps a visionary PM. I think the only way to actually get some traction on that one is either to be involved in an early stage startup, which is, I would say, my recommendation for that, or to be close to a team that does something like that in a company and learn from there. But I think it's easier to be involved in an early stage startup, most definitely. But yeah, that's kind of like probably the trickiest things to gain experience with, because it's not so common to be involved in such setting. Thanks for the question. And when we look at those 4 kind of like levels of uncertainties, and and we think about, okay, so we understand that there's multiple levels of uncertainties. How do we deal with them? So I think one thing that's important to understand is very often you need to understand in which level of uncertainty you are at the moment. You can land in a company or in a team, and you can think that you're in a solution space, that you're kind of in simple and obvious state, but you're actually not. So one important thing is to do kind of like the assessment of where you actually are. Another important thing is to mention is that simple context is essentially a solution space. I think a lot of people have gained some experience in that. You don't necessarily need to be a PM to operate in a solution space. You can be a project manager as well. But most of the PMs are working in a problem space. That's kind of, I think, where 90% of time spent. And the thing is, piggybacking to also the last question about the visionary PM, the thing is that I think we're all trained in a way to and educated in the way we're operating in a professional environment to operate in this problem space, to operate, to be good in those complicated contexts. We're kind of good in analysis. We're good in getting a lot of information and then trying to distill that information and to make something out of that. In kind of lay an assumption, we're solving for X, and this is how I'm going to get that. It's a classical case study setting. If you look at all the interviews, job interviews for PMs, all the case studies that people solve on those interviews are basically focused on this complicated space. Like here's a problem, and you need to kind of like analyze the problem to get all the information, to set all the assumptions, and then you need to synthesize that into a solution and kind of walk me chronologically, like lay out a direction or a setting how you would deliver that solution. But that's still operation in org context. It doesn't help, and it doesn't teach how to operate in a situation when you don't have information. You don't have any information to work off. So the ways to operate in these four contexts, starting from kind of like, let's start this time from chaotic. Okay, yeah, I'm going to wrap in 2 minutes with this. I'm going to get super quick. So let's start kind of from chaotic and then get backwards. So the only thing you can do in a chaotic setting is act. So there's literally no, nothing you can probe or know. There's nothing you can sense because there's no order. So you're literally acting and trying to sense around yourself what happened after you're acting. A good example with this pandemic would be the situation that happened. Like, we don't know what to do. Like, hey, we got a huge thing going on here. Let's shut down the airports. Was there an informed decision to do? Probably not. But people had to, like governments had to act, had to do something in a highly chaotic environment. Restaurants, people that were hit most by situations like this, they had to act. Like, they were operating the day before in a simple space, operating the business sheet of a restaurant, and then a day later they were shut down, and they went from a simple space into a chaos and chaotic space, and they need to act. They couldn't make sense of anything. They just didn't act. So the first thing you do is you act, then you sense what happened, and then you respond based on that. So you can gather at least some information what happens, kind of what based on what you did. And then getting into a complex space, instead of acting, you're probing. So in a complex space, you can probe something that was proven to work in a similar situations before. You can also call that like putting an educated guess and moving. And then you can sense, evaluate the result, and respond. You can either refine the probing, or you can set another hypothesis. And that's basically the space where the most of the initial discoveries live. Other two I kind of like already explained. In a problem space, you're sensing the world around you. You're trying to get information you need. You're analyzing them, and you're responding. While in the solution space, you don't even need to analyze. After sensing, you just categorize. Back, for example, to the RICE model, you get all the input around impact, and then you just categorize that and cost and confidence and so on. And then you just categorize and you respond with your short-term roadmap. So essentially, it's a circle, because at some point, again, like companies disrupt, you move from a simple to chaotic, and that's how you kind of go throughout the whole cycle. And that's how essentially you work in environments where there's various levels of uncertainties, and which tactic works most for each of them. So to wrap and to call this, I think that my takeaway of this would be to use this as a frame where you can think around where you want to hone, which specific skill you want to hone, or in which particular domain you have a gap, and then like think how you manage your career and what is the best setting and the best operational context where you can hone a specific skill or close a specific gap. Looking at domains of strengths, if you think that your gaps are influencing your relationship building, a large company is a great place to close those gaps. Or if you want to hone your skills on execution, definitely go to a small company or startup. Similar with operational context or with big risks. If you feel that you're unable to properly tackle feasibility risks, you need to work more closely with engineering teams, maybe even get into kind of like a platform PM or a technical PM role. If you can't properly assess the user needs or work around user journeys, start working much closer in kind of maybe some B2C setting in a product which is high level of design influence. So find a gap you want to close and pick a right operational context where that gap makes most sense, and see how you can close that. And with that, I would wrap. Thanks a lot. Now questions.
Amazing, Boris. That was really insightful. I mean, before anybody else jumps in, yeah, I have a quick question. Yeah. Go ahead, Mihai.
You go ahead.
Yeah. So do you think that this context matrix that you presented, that can align for a business to the horizons themselves? That once they build something out, it's like building it all from chaos and then moving towards that simplicity and then into another vertical, and you hit another horizon.
Exactly. It absolutely maps 101.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mihai. Sorry about that.
So what's that? Is there anything somewhere in the middle between a corporate PM and a startup PM? And another question, which we've seen a lot of people aspiring to a PM role. Which one do you think fits better for someone who's just getting started, or which would be the pros and cons to each of both of them?
I don't think there's one size fits all. I think it depends on a personality. I've seen people excel in startups without prior experience because they're naturally comfortable with wearing multiple hats and doing a ton of things, and they might have naturally more resiliency or tolerance towards ambiguity and being comfortable in a very highly ambiguous setting. But at the same time, I've seen people who kind of in a large company excel because they get better at doing individual things and then kind of like growing within that vertical, and then maybe moving to adjacent vertical and doing something else, and then kind of moving, and then they're trying to synthesize all that, and they're like, okay, like let me go to a startup and experience the chaos. So I've seen both. I wouldn't recommend either. I think it's very unique to personality, to individual personality.
Okay, amazing.
The only thing I could recommend is gain experience across the board. Don't spend a career working only in startups. Don't spend a career working only in large enterprises. The more you spread your experience across the board, the more senior you will be and the more valuable you're going to be to every future employer because you're going to bring unique perspectives to the table.
Amazing. So a follow-up to a couple of things that I noticed as questions and comments. I know that when you move into more of a corporate or an enterprise environment, you're fighting smaller battles. You have good amount of resources available, but that also is a pull towards the more tactical than the strategic. So on a day-to-day, how do you manage that balance for a corporate PM or an enterprise PM to manage the strategic vision, because so much less visibility is available to you, but a lot of the tactical work is required of you. So how do you balance that? Because ultimately, you're managing your manager to deliver something, but also you're managing a team that's looking towards you for vision. Why we're building, that small product that's gonna move the needle somewhere else.
Good question and good point. So I think that essentially you're treating one type of strategic thinking to another. There's a lot more complexity in a larger setting because the products the markets and the needs they're addressing are much more complex. So let me not talk about Wayfair. Let's maybe pick an example of Google or Amazon, because like they're commonly known. If you're a PM in Google and you're essentially so if you're a Google PM, yes, you can't. Let's say you're a PM in a Gmail team. You apparently are not going to set a strategy for Gmail, right? So from that perspective, you're not strategic. Mm-hmm. However, a feature you deliver in Gmail can be used across the entire Google system of Google's products. How will a feature, for example, in an email, integrate with Google Maps? When you write something and that it connects to a point of interest in Google Maps or your journey to some point, it's an information they can leverage. Mm-hmm. Or how is that going to integrate with Google Calendar or Google Drive or Google Suite? So you're thinking more strategically in a direction of how will my, I'm not going to say feature, but how is my initiative going to create an incremental impact throughout the entire ecosystem of products? And that's also strategic thinking. So it's not strategic thinking on the level of what I'm going to do with Gmail in the next 3 years, but it's strategic thinking on how I'm going to leverage what I build with other teams, other products, and reach like 3 billion users in a better way.
Amazing. Yeah, that makes sense. So for a startup PM now, right? How much structure do you think that they can bring initially that then they, the whole startup will leverage later on? Because I've seen that, okay, as a sprinter, as Anton's pointing out, you're always looking at a chaotic environment, do this, do that, but do it very quickly. The alacrity is the word of the day. But also there has to be some structure to that. So how much of that structure would you say that you bring from the enterprise side with you to actually succeed as a startup PM?
I think you can bring a lot. Apparently, you're not going to overcomplicate. You're not going to create an overhead in kind of like processes and communication and things like that. But I think that a discipline and clarity is very important in startups as well. Especially because they don't have a lot of resources, and being able to kind of like create more discipline in that chaotic environment is much needed. I think a lot of things in startups happen. I mean, again, I really don't like to generalize, right? And there's like all sorts of things happening, but to a great extent, a startup might suffer from not having enough discipline. They're like, hey, we don't have time for these sheets and these metrics. We got to deliver. But what I typically say is it doesn't matter how fast you move if you're going to hit the wall without brakes. At the end of the day, like, slow is fast. If you have the right direction, if you don't have the right direction, velocity doesn't matter. And to this question about enterprise PM, sprinter, or a marathoner, I don't think it's an obvious question. My personal answer to that would be both. There's also another more nuances, but first, why both? Because in enterprise, very often the value you bring can be seen much later. Meaning you're working with large products, they're already established. Like imagine yourself, like let's stick with the Gmail PM example. Imagine yourself as a Gmail PM. There's probably not a thing in the world you can do that would increase 10% adoption or engagement or any other KPI they want to be measuring right now. So there's probably nothing you can do at that scale, right? Which means like, hey, you're as an enterprise PM, you're not a sprinter, you're actually a marathoner, because like there's a lot of you only can build and then something can happen in a year or two, which technically is not true, because you can also deliver very quick value incrementally through adjacent spaces. So why both? Because you need to be concerned equally about what you're working on right now, piggybacking to the piece I said earlier, as well as the constellation of things 6 months from now. Because as an enterprise PM, you're not driving a speedboat, you're driving a cruiser. and you can't turn cruiser 180 degrees.
Yeah.
It's not a speedboat. So if you don't get those insights in time, you can't just come to 500 other engineers and tell them, hey guys, we need to do this. I was wrong last month, right? So that's kind of like, why are you both sprinter and marathoner?
Yeah. So one last question for me, and I see that the everybody else is really quiet. So I'll just continue. What can senior product people and then upwards, like lead product people, head of product, directors of product, do in an enterprise to nurture their juniors? What I mean is that the juniors always come in, they see that their remit is just, move the needle so much, and they get into the solution space because the DLS is already done, the designs, the UX is already done, the UI somebody else is going to do. So their head moves towards a solution space, and I've seen this happen. So how would you suggest that they start nurturing those people so that their head goes into the problem space and they look at something in this particular way, and then they come to the solution space saying, okay, these are the tools that we're using and these are the constraints that we have, rather than saying, hey, this is what we have. Let's just, connect the two dots and that's it. Our job's done.
Got it. So I'm not going to imply anything, but my personal opinion is that if in such settings, it's probably the wrong. I'd say there's a bit of a problem with the culture in such settings, because even in big companies, typically you're always trying to challenge people to kind of get on the next level. So even those most junior PMs that are involved in solution spaces should get opportunities, and there's no reason why they shouldn't, to tackle smaller scale things in problem space. And I think that every manager is expected to create such opportunities and to challenge in a positive way, to challenge their PMs with something that's just a little bit above their head. For example, I do that all the time. Like, I'm constantly trying to see, okay, I got somebody who only takes care of a delivery. I want them to take care of a whole solution, or they're taking care of a solution. I want them to take care of a problem, or they're taking care of a problem. I want them to take care of kind of the whole objective, right? If I see that they're okay with tackling problem in the ambiguity level with the problem, then I'm not even going to tell them the problem. I'm going to be like, okay, like here's an objective. Find me problems in these objectives. There's a nice, there's also kind of like a very nice way, and there are frameworks for that as well, but we're getting into our time, how you should actually work with people and delegate, because this basically is a core delegation skill for a manager. How do you delegate something in a way that you help people grow, but at the same time, you're being close enough to catch things if they fall before they actually fell to the ground?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So in my mind, in good companies, junior people are not solely taking care of the solutions.
Absolutely, that makes sense. Cool. Over to you, Mihai.
Well, it was super insightful, Boris. Thanks a lot for joining us directly from Berlin. I guess we're gonna go ahead and share the slides on our LinkedIn group. Absolutely. And then what you've mentioned in the beginning, if everybody's based in Germany, you're hiring. So good luck with that.
Feel free to reach out.
Yeah, and I know that the Apple event is going in parallel. So
thank you.
It's a loss for them. It's a loss for them.
Yeah. But no, once again, Boris, I mean, super insightful and very interesting perspective. Thanks a lot. And then I guess we'll be in touch.
Thanks for having me. I wish you all a great rest of the evening.
Thank you. Thanks everyone. Bye.
Bye, everybody.